wicked amount of data and so on, just because there's stuff happening. But come December, after that, who knows if we'll go another year without ever writing about the NHS again.
Yeah, that would be nice. Some people are saying that they expect this to continue indefinitely. It's like they have this World Telecom Policy Forum after that, and they have these important potential meetings and so on and so forth. So you'll probably hear about it. Some people are seriously doubting anything serious can be resolved. It's too fluid. Thing in the OT Constitution, Article 34, that says that they can already do that.
Yeah, they can already control.
And obviously some of them already to the internet. It seems like most of the debate is shifted to the ethno-proposal and to the charging, which is what it should be focused on. The whole some Indian proposals and not revive the censorship issue, but talk more about the government's effects making. The biggest I think it's more of it's just this 15-year struggle we've been having over the relationship between governments and the internet. We're continuing on different forms and 90 years old. ICANN is another one. ICANN's governmental advisory committee is getting more and more powerful. And nation states can act on their own. On the cybersecurity stuff that's happening. They actually, the weird thing about it is that the people in ICANN are not resisting these camel's nose and attempt tactics like that because I think the American government sort of believes that they have to give governments more power to get in order to keep them in the ICANN regime. And they're not looking very far down the road. So for example, when in Toronto, somebody said, well, before you can overturn that advice, you have to have a 2/3 vote of the board instead of just like a majority. And it's just like another step in making your advice essentially.
Hello, brother. How are you doing? I'm really happy to be on the same side of an issue with you. Maybe a first.
You're a free market guy.
Well, I'm Gary Powell.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. No, don't get up.
It's good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
Very proud.
I'm sure you. It's going to be a good time.
Not so much sad, because that's sort of too easy. We're sort of
I'm sure you know some of my colleagues.
public-private partnership.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm based in.
Not hard work. We want batteries to be up here.
Then I left Microsoft in 2001.
As long as it's
It's common from Microsoft IT in Geneva. So I spent 3.5 years there.
it's light. I mean, everything's nice.
Chief legal liaison for the
Very
IT had been leading Geneva based on didn't have a liaison office in York, and we decided Oh, since we talked about it, well, I think it's something we talked about. So that's been interesting.
It's not my biggest nightmare.
Sorry.
Yeah, but nation states using a fairly weak
All right,
institution.
getting ready to get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Jerry Brito, and I direct the Technology Policy Program at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. I love the background music that we still have over us. It's one of the benefits of being at the W. It's coming off? Thank you. For those of you who don't know Mercatus, we are a university-based research center that tries to bridge the gap between academic ideas and real-world policy problems. We focus on how markets work to improve people's lives. The word Mercatus, yeah, this is being a little...
They want to turn off the
They do,
music,
yeah.
don't they?
Can we get the music? Yeah, why don't we postpone Big Center? We're a university-based research center that tries to bridge a gap between academic ideas and real-world policy problems. And we focus on how markets help improve people's lives. The word Mercatus means market in Latin. And we do this by training graduate students, by conducting research, and by engaging in educational outreach, such as programs as one today. Today we're here to discuss the World Conference on International Telecommunication, or the WICIT, which will be held in a few weeks in Dubai. It's a once-in-a-generation that governments from around the world gather at such a conference to revise the international telecommunications regulations, which is a UN-sponsored treaty that governs international telecom practices. And this year's meeting is especially important because it's the first revision of the ITRs since the internet and since mobile technology has really taken off. And these questions will be on the table. I personally became interested in the WICIT because several experts who I respect and admire, like Vincent Cerf, the father of the internet, and FCC Commissioner Robert McDowell, they were sounding the alarm over the idea that some ITU member states, including Russia and China, had put forth proposals to regulate the internet that would be taken up at the WICIT. Vince Cerf warned in the New York Times that such proposals quote, raise the prospect of policies that enable government controls but greatly diminish the permissionless innovation that underlies the extraordinary internet-based economic growth, to say nothing of trampling on human rights, which is pretty scary stuff. So I wanted to see these proposals for myself. And what I found, however, is that although these proposals had the potential to affect the internet that we all use and that belongs to all of us, these proposals were not public. Now, they're not classified, and they're not secret, and if you knew someone at the State Department or at a company or at a civil society organization that had paid tens of thousands of dollars to become a sector member of the ITU, you could ask them for the documents, and they would give them to you. But that still meant that the public did not have general access to these proposals. And as a result, I figured the public would not have a way to have a conversation about how these proposals might affect the future of the internet and be able to weigh in with their respective countries' delegations to the WICIT. So with the help of my Mercatus Center colleague Eli Dorado, we started a website that we mischievously, I must admit, titled wicitleaks.org, where anyone with access to the proposals could upload them anonymously and make them available to the public. Since we launched the site in June, we have published over 65 previously undisclosed documents. And since then, we've been deeply engaged with the WICIT process, collaborating with the State Department and engaging even in some empirical research, which Eli is going to present later in the panel. First, though, we are very fortunate to have with us today Ambassador Terry Kramer, who is the head of the United States delegation to the WICIT. He is going to give us a preview of the WICIT and tell us how the U.S. is approaching the conference. Ambassador Kramer has had a 25-year career in international telecommunications. For 18 of those 25 years, he worked for Vodafone Group, AirTouch, in a variety of roles, domestically and internationally. He has also spent several years leading and advising small growing technology companies, serving as CEO at QCOM International and as a board member of Fiber Tower, 724 Solutions, and Sonim Technologies. In addition, Ambassador Kramer is an entrepreneur in residence at the Harvard Business School and a lecturer and faculty advisor in the Global Access Program at UCLA's Anderson School of Business. He also sits on the boards of Envivio Corporation, the Harvard Business School, California Research Center, UCLA's Economics Department, the World Affairs Council of Northern California, and Larkin Street Youth Center. A lot of boards. Ambassador, it's a pleasure to have you. You want to come up?
So Jerry, thank you, and thank all of you for being here. One of the things I found most encouraging about my work is the amount of engagement that's happened here. It's served us very, very well on the U.S. delegation to have that engagement, to ensure that we're getting our messages clear, that we have a strong outreach effort, because as you know, this dialogue is going on a global stage. Now, let me start out. I always find it's important to start out talking about what is our vision here. What are we trying to accomplish? Because it's very easy to get into a lot of specifics on regulations being proposed and adjustments being made, et cetera. And we don't say, what are we seeking to do here? And I would start with the premise that the telecom and the internet sectors have been incredibly vibrant sectors. Those sectors, if you were to say out of all the things our generation will leave for others, those sectors will be the success elements. Those will be our legacy much more broadly. And why are those sectors important and who are they serving? Again, I would think about three constituencies with this. Those sectors are serving citizens because they're allowing people to connect with one another, whether it be via social media, whether it be sharing information, etc. It's helping consumers because of all the commercial transactions that happen, all of the entrepreneurial activities that create value in access to the internet. And then finally, societies. And how do societies benefit? And I think some of Eli's work and others is very, very important here about what type of domino effect do you get when you have access to broadband, access to the internet, and economic growth. So those things are very important vision items here, success of telecom and the internet. Now, if you were to say, what are the two foundational elements underneath those two that support success in those areas? Number one would be multi-stakeholder governance. In looking at the internet, and you had to point to one thing and say, what construct, what governance approach, what engagement model allowed for success of the internet? It would be getting a variety of stakeholders engaged, sharing ideas, technical expertise, etc., and driving success in the internet. If I were to talk about the telecom space, I would say it's liberalized markets. Markets that have multiple providers of service, that create a variety of options for consumers, that in general drive down prices, that increase broadband availability, that create this domino effect of economic growth. And so those, to me, multi-stakeholder governance and liberalized markets are the two underpinnings of what is important here. So I'd like to talk about the wicket with those ideas and those kind of parameters in mind. Let me start by talking globally about what success looks like. We talked about, again, the internet, and we talked about the telecom sector. There's a lot of hyperbole about, the wicket and the internet being U.S. controlled, U.S. dominated, which I think is actually a very inaccurate portrayal of what's played out. Certainly a lot of the original innovators came from the U.S. But if you look at economic activity of the internet abroad, it's growing at a much faster rate. Just give you a couple of facts here. If you look at the number of internet users and how that number's changed annually over the last 10 years, the growth of internet users has been about 33% in Africa, about half of that rate in Latin America and Asia at about 17%. If you look at Europe, it was about 10%, and the US is 4%. So if you say, where is the growth in users and activity, it's happening abroad. And coming from Vodafone, as was mentioned earlier, is one of the things I've realized is you see waves of technology pass to incremental geographies. Those technologies and the impact on society look different depending on the marketplace. That's the beauty of technology. So when I was in Vodafone, if we went to our Kenyan market, mobile payments was the primary vehicle of offering new service via, again, an SMS technology. The same thing happens in internet with unique content and applications developed in a variety of ways in successive markets. And so understanding the global nature of this is very, very important, because I don't think our position from a U.S. standpoint is or should be a U.S. position. This is a position about what's going to benefit on a global landscape. So growth is significant globally. Let me now talk about specific proposals that the U.S. has put forward, and then I'm going to talk about proposals that have come from others that we've got concerns about, because again, I think it was referenced, there's some worrisome proposals out there. But let me start with ours first of all. We submitted a first tranche of proposals on August the 3rd. And we said in that first set of proposals that we think the review of these ITRs, the International Telecom Regulations, that the principles and the regulations need to be high level, very high level. And the reason we said this is the last time these regulations were updated was in 1988. When you think about it, in 1988, people would say, well, where were you guys, or where was the ITU in all of this in 24 years? But you look at this and say, geez, these sectors have done amazingly well being left alone in essence with high-level ITRs. And there's an interesting kind of phenomena I know in my corporate background that, I think anybody that's in a leadership role wants to get in and do things. We all want to help out, we're bright, we're ambitious, etc. But that tendency tends to cause us to go in and tinker with things. In many cases, it's not helpful. And sometimes the best thing to do is understand that things being left alone, especially when you get to the internet, which requires this vibrant, distributed environment that's going to look different in different places, that creates success by itself. And so keeping that set of parameters we think is very important. And we said make these ITRs high level, ensure that any recommendations that come are voluntary in nature, and make sure we're focusing on telecom services. Because these were originally set up for the telecom sector, not the internet sector. And if we adhere to those, we allow for flexibility. The worst thing that can happen here is these ITRs get updated in a prescriptive manner, and we end up having to come back in a year or two and adjust them because they were rigid. They were fixed for what was going on in 2012, not contemplating the amount of change that's going on literally over the next few months and few years, etc. So that was our first set of proposals that went out. We sent out a second tranche of proposals 2 weeks ago. And we sent these out to start putting forward more of our vision. Because people said, listen, the United States is saying no to a lot of proposals that are coming in from a variety of nations. You tell us, what do you believe in? What do you think should be the way the sectors are going to grow? And that drove us to launch our second tranche of proposals that talked about the criticality of liberalized markets. That if you want to drive broadband access, there's only one model that has been proven today to work. And I think the views about pragmatism, about what works and what doesn't work, etc., is a very important philosophy here. Liberalized markets have accelerated broadband deployment by having multiple providers of service, by having public-private partnerships, by encouraging innovation in business models, and I think of India as a great example, where there's network sharing with the mobile operators that allows builds in remote areas, that all of that liberalized market is what has really been proven one-to-one to create that growth of broadband. We also identified in the second tranche of submissions our comments that came out of our region, the CTEL region, which is South America, Central America, and North America, where we talked about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a very hotly discussed item. And by the way, on this issue, I think it's a great example that there are a lot of problems in cybersecurity. If you look at malware attacks, there's 67,000 a day. The number has doubled over the last 5 years. The incidence of spam is increasing, etc. So there's no debate, it's a problem. However, what the issue is how do you solve that problem? And do you believe there are single organizations that need to solve this? Regardless of who the organization is, but where's the best solution? And again, to go back to a multi-stakeholder governance model, we very much believe having organizations that have technical expertise, that have a vital, inclusive process for soliciting views, for providing solutions, et cetera, that is what's going to work. And this is a pragmatic view. This is not a theoretical view. This is something that we've seen that actually has worked. So let's be realistic about the right effective solutions that are going to happen in cybersecurity. And so that was our second tranche of proposals. Let me now talk about proposals that have come in from other nations, other regions that are of concern. And the interesting thing, when you look at a lot of these proposals and you read them, they sound innocuous. They sound friendly. They sound like there's no big deal to this. And then you start peeling the onion back and saying, what does this actually mean? And who is proposing this? And what are the practices that might be associated with the people that are proposing this? And all of a sudden you get pretty worried about this. And coming into this as a lay person to the technical aspects of developing these ITRs, I've come to appreciate the nuance in wording and what's being proposed. So the first set of proposals I want to talk about originally came out of Europe, which were the ETNO proposals, the European Telecom Network Operators. So these are some of the large operators, whether it be Deutsche Telekom, France Telecom, et cetera, that said, listen, we are trying to build out our networks. And our networks now are taking huge loads of data traffic. Absolutely true. And as the world is going more and more video, which again is absolutely true, creates a greater stressor on the networks. But this is again where the problem comes from, is when you get into the solution mode. Most players would say, listen, create value to the customer, you will be able to derive value that comes back to the network operator. And that virtuous cycle creates opportunities. You have an old model, as a matter of fact, the one that originally was in the telco segment 25 years ago, that said you're going to get transfer pricing payments. Basically, you're going to have to pay to have traffic delivered abroad. And so what these proposals said is, in essence, if you're an internet player, you're generating content, applications, et cetera, you want your traffic to be delivered abroad, you're going to have to pay for it to get delivered abroad. Very worrisome proposal. So if you look at, I love to bring up the example of the Khan Academy. Khan Academy provides YouTube clips, free education, math, science, etc. Global audience, not a US audience, a global audience. That model, nonprofit organization that wants to deliver that traffic, how would that model survive? One of two things likely would happen. One is the traffic doesn't get delivered, or the second thing is you go from a free model to a paid model. And you look at developing markets and say, is that a good thing for developing markets where people have to pay for this access to education? Not a good outcome. You look at academic institutions, the impact on academic institutions that provide free education, free content, et cetera, terrible, devastating implications there. So we have come out very strongly against these proposals, that these would create an environment which would stifle traffic. And it is a lose-lose-lose situation. And not thinking in this context that it's just US companies that are generating content, but this content more and more is generated from a variety of markets globally. The second set of proposals I wanted to talk about are content-related proposals. And these proposals get into what happens with content that is delivered and who has the right to see and do what with what content. And these proposals look something like this. We're nations and we're trying to block spam and we're trying to protect our networks. There's all sorts of risks to them. And we need to have a more interventionist policy that allows us to mandate traffic routing. That traffic routing would allow us to protect networks. It makes a simpler task there. Those type of proposals have significant downside. Because number one, on an economic basis, when you look today at how traffic flows, roughly there's about 425,000 independent networks of traffic globally. That has driven down the cost of transit and peering. That's created in part a free internet, that's supported a free internet. The other issue you have with all of this is not only in addition to raising cost, but you make it very easy for governments or any one organization to censor traffic, to look at who is doing what, who is saying what to whom. The fundamental things that we believe about in free speech and democracy get put at risk with this. And again, it's an innocuous set of proposals, but it's something that we have a lot of concern over. And this is something, again, is a lose-lose because it would stifle traffic globally. So those are two types of proposals that we've got concerns with, that we've shared. There's a variety of other ones that have come in recently. Let me talk a little bit about what I see as success, and then I want to talk about recent travels and then close. But on these proposals, one of the things we've got to think about is what does a successful conference look like? And Gary and I were talking about that earlier, and I think there's very good alignment that we want a successful conference. There's absolutely no benefit for us walking away and saying, this is a failed conference. We live in a globally connected environment where we want to make sure the flows of information are open and vital. What in general, to me, is played out is there's agreement on problems and opportunities. We all want to drive broadband access to the next 2, 3, 4 billion users in the world. We all want to make sure our networks are secure. But what we do to protect those things and drive those things is what's at risk here. Because if we're saying governments own, at the end of the day, fundamental activities that get into an invasive nature of content and traffic management, doesn't work. If they get into a fundamental model of transfer pricing mechanisms, doesn't work. Let's stay away from polarizing solutions that we're not going to agree on, they're going to be non-negotiable items. I've been very impressed with Hamid Toure in his messages. He's the Secretary General of the ITU, about seeking consensus and making sure we get a successful outcome here. Now that's going to be the important piece that's going to have to play out at this conference. Mohammed Al Ghanim is the conference chair from Dubai. They're opening up, their nation to the world. Great set of opportunities. They want to make sure it's a successful conference. One of the things I've learned in the leadership roles I've had is half of the battle is agreeing on what the problem is, agreeing on opportunities, and figure out later what the solutions are, because those can get into a very difficult environment. This is going to be a 10-day conference, not much time to work through all of these things. So I hope that is the mindset going forward. Let me share a couple of thoughts on recent travels and proposals that have come in, et cetera. I was at the Internet Governance Forum last week in Baku, and what a great conference to see the vitality of multi-stakeholder governance. The input about what makes for a successful internet, about where it goes in the future, how do you get broad engagement and participation was very impressive. I had about 20 bilateral discussions. As you can imagine, we're doing a lot of outreach work, sharing our views with a variety of nations, in turn hearing theirs, and trying to work towards agreement. So what I would say, first of all, on the bilateral side is we have a fair number of like-minded colleagues in a variety of the European nations. Very, very encouraging. Common views about rights of citizens and consumers, about business models that work, et cetera. So very good agreement there. Same thing in parts of Asia. We have very good partners there as well. In Kenya, a very good partner seeking to help communicate broadly in Africa about the benefits of liberalized markets, about the benefits of multi-stakeholder governance. I would say in aggregate in Africa, there have been a variety of proposals discussed that have been very worrisome. And this came from about a month ago, predominantly a lot of French-speaking African nations, but there's a lot of other nations there that really need to be speaking up on these issues that are now taking a lot of good interest there. We need to be working with them. That's a critical focus of ours. Where the areas where there were concerns, again, I'm speaking in full candor here. In India, there were a set of proposals that came out last week that were candidly surprising. India, one of the world's largest democracies, a great, vibrant broadband and telecommunication sector. I've come from, again, a company that does business there, that has done a great job there. And the set of proposals that have come out of India have talked about things like Equinet. And you'd say, well, what does that term Equinet mean? Well, it's equality in network builds. Well, it implies basically a transfer pricing mechanism where developed markets need to fund developing markets. And again, no question about the need for funding for building out in developing markets. But how you do that so you don't create a bigger problem with loss of traffic is a big issue. There's also a variety of nations, and India had intimated this, about information security, about processing, putting those definitional items into the wicket. Very worrisome again, because all of a sudden you're shifting into the internet space, which we don't want to see. So we're going to spend more time with India. We've had a great relationship overall with them. We work with them in a lot of things, but we do need to be spending time there sharing our views. Brazil, I would say the same situation. Obviously a vibrant, growing economy, good relations on a lot of areas, but we need to work with them because there are a variety of proposals that, again, we don't yet see eye to eye with. And we need to find this common ground. So in terms of the next 2 or 3 weeks, the number one priority we have on the U.S. delegation is outreach. We need to be working with as many nations as we can, hearing their views, sharing our views, and getting to a common agreement. And again, getting a common agreement is important here because we have a lot of organizations that do business abroad. We don't want to isolate ourselves. That doesn't benefit anybody. But we need to find that common agreement without violating our core principles. Our core principles about charging models, our core principles about free speech and democracy and not allowing areas to be violating those activities, that we're not going to violate those. But there's a variety of other areas we definitely can be talking about. So that is going to be our challenge and our opportunity the next 2-3 weeks. Let me just say in closing before we take questions that the strength and beauty of the U.S. system to me has come across. It's been fascinating traveling. We've got a vibrant U.S. delegation of 100 representatives. People from U.S. government, people from civil society. Eli's obviously on our delegation. We've got people from industry, from the internet side, from the telecom side, and they've been hugely helpful in several areas, crafting our positions, making sure we communicate those positions on an outreach basis is an absolutely essential activity. And I would ask all of you the extent at which you agree.
Randy Bush is sort of famous in this here, and the efforts that they had to make in sub-Saharan Africa to get internet exchange points, to even convince people of the value of internet exchange points, and sort of this vital infrastructure that actually makes a lot of these financial issues move.
Right.
So what about the idea of establishing, or making a proposal to establish some sort of international fund to build internet exchange points and other infrastructure connections to undersea cables and all that to alleviate these problems for the developing world?
Yeah. So it's a great question. Let me first frame it in what would success look like out of the conference, because you have to say where do all these proposals go? We don't like the ones that have been put on the table that have to do with sending party pays, et cetera. One of the things I think we should be thinking about is a broadband 2.0 environment. What does broadband 2.0 look like in terms of models for success for broadband deployment going forward? And I would just broaden it from what you said. It's a broader piece that says, what are some of the best practices in spectrum awards, in public-private partnerships that have worked the best? What results have they created? By the way, Google's made a lot of the investments you've talked about. What are the range of public-private partnerships that can happen? What environment needs to be created where people are going to invest in these markets? And then importantly, what has been the downstream positive impact of these investments that have occurred and content development that's occurred, et cetera? So I think that's a very interesting idea, and I could see that as one of the successful ways we exit the conference. And we're going to need to think about it. Maybe you'd like to help us think about what does that look like specifically? Because we do need to put things out in earnest that are solutions that can work for the future without going to solutions that are counterproductive. So completely with you.
Other questions? Thank you. My name is Larry Cherokee. I'm a citizen in the community here, so you're talking to the civil sector, as it were. The issue I guess I have is the recent election, the American election, reflected two basic issues, economics and social values. It seems your problem can be boiled down to the same taxonomy, bifurcation of this problem into the United Nations concerns about human rights and economic welfare of the entire world. What's the role of this conference in addressing those issues for the betterment of the world?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question because you say, well, what do you want to achieve out of all of this, and what role does the conference play? The most important, first of all, outcome of the conference are not actually the specific regulations, but it's the norms and the values that are set. And this conference, on the plus side, with all the worry and issues that we've talked about, gives us an opportunity to talk explicitly about those two areas of economics and societal issues and opportunities. And so one of the things I think this conference should do is put on the table what models really work. So let me, on the economic side, and again, any of you that have got specifics you'd like to share, via research has been done, et cetera, but I have not seen one model under this old antiquated regime where you advance broadband penetration, where you advance availability of service, where you advance affordability of service, et cetera. And to put that forward and talk about that explicitly. And I think of Kenya, I think of Ghana, I think of India that have done great jobs in this area. And so out of this conference, to be able to talk about that, to me, would be a great outcome. I think on free speech, the galvanizing aspect of civil society and the multi-stakeholder governance, to me, has been a great piece. And I don't know where the ITU stands on having civil society participate in the actual conference and be in attendance there, which I think would be terrific. Because, again, you'd have a lot of this feedback, because we fundamentally believe, again, on these type of issues, you need a broad set of stakeholders, similar to what we've done in the U.S. And so hearing those pieces of feedback is very important. And so I think talking about that, now the issue about free speech and democracy, being candid with you, that is going to ring hollow in some places. These are views we have, views that other nations have, but in some places it's difficult. And I think in some cases what we need to talk about are the economic benefits of free speech and democracy, because that may resonate better. But this conference gives us the opportunity to talk about those. And if we can make progress, we're in good shape. Last thing I'll just mention on that is, like any values discussion, we need to be shrewd about how we're communicating them, because we don't want to come across like we're preaching to others. At the end of the day, we need to influence others. So we need to demonstrate an understanding of the environment that they're in. We need to be able to talk in global terms, so we're not just talking US, US, US. And we need to be able to be clear about what we're trying to achieve out of all that. And I think if we're shrewd in that, we maximize our influence, and that to me is the best outcome here.
If there are no more questions, join me. There's one question.
We'll take one last one, yeah.
Hi, Nick Kerr from Fierce Government IT. You mentioned areas where you might have flexibility. You talked about areas where you'll be insistent against meeting certain proposals. What are the areas of flexibility?
Okay. Let me first start with clarity about where we're not flexible, because I think some of these are table stakes to other discussions or gating items to other discussions. Number one, the definitions that are used, telecommunications and how you define that, is an absolutely critical one. If we get into an environment day one that says we're going to look at ICT, we're going to look at information processing, all of the kind of internet-related terms, that is not an acceptable start and focus, and we might as well not waste our time. We need to also think about what agencies or organizations are subject to the proposals that are going forward. So there's a fairly technical discussion going on what's called recognized operating agencies versus operating agencies. There are many proposals that have come in that said the organizations that should be subject to these regulations are operating agencies. Operating agencies includes public providers of telecom service, which we are fine with. That's how the ITRs were originally set up. But it includes private networks, any type of private network. So anybody that's got, cloud-based computing and, private internet networks, et cetera, potentially are negatively impacted there. And government networks are impacted, including the humanitarian activities of a lot of government networks. So we are not comfortable with that, because again, that broadens the scope and creates a huge amount of complexity about what are all these terms mean, knowing you have all these organizations that are affected. So what are the areas we can be flexible on? And again, I don't want to go through my exact negotiating strategy, because we want to do that when we get there. But let me give you an example of mobile roaming. Everybody wants to see better mobile roaming rates globally, but we got to be careful about how we're achieving that. Because again, regulating that, rate regulation there, sets a message out that you believe government should then be intervening in the following, 5 or 6 areas. So if there's an opportunity to talk about how we can enhance transparency of rates, transparency of usage, that would be an area that, we could live with, that we find, acceptable. Those would be the types of areas that are okay. But the fundamental ones on economic models or things that violate potential freedom of speech and democracy, those are not. Okay? Thank you all very much.
So now we're going to move into our panel discussion previewing the Wicket. We have some differing and interesting perspectives up here. I won't read you extensive bios. You've got those in your chairs, but I'll just tell you who we have up here. We have Eli Dorado, who is a research fellow at the Mercatus Center, and he is with the Technology Policy Program. After he speaks, we're going to have Paul Brigner speak, and he is Regional Director of the North American Bureau at the Internet Society, where he oversees projects, initiatives, and activities across the Internet Society's functional and programmatic areas in the United States and Canada. After Paul, we'll hear from Gary Fowley, who is the head of the Liaison Office of the International Telecommunication Union to the United Nations. He was responsible for communications for the UN World Summit on the Information Society in 2003 and 2005. And until 2009, he was the chief of the media liaison for the United Nations in New York. And after Gary, we'll finally hear from Milton Mueller, who is professor at Syracuse University School of Information Studies and Access for All professor at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. His research focuses on the property rights institutions and global governance in communications and information industries. Milton is one of the world's leading experts on internet governance, and his book, Ruling the Root, is considered the definitive account of the political and economic forces behind the creation of ICANN. So we have a really distinguished panel, and we'll start with Eli.
All right, thanks, Jerry. I should preface my remarks by noting that although I am on the U.S. delegation, the views I express today are purely my own, not necessarily those of the U.S. government. Ambassador Kramer speaks for the U.S., I do not. So as Ambassador Kramer mentioned, one of the issues that is likely to come up at the Wicket is that of sender pays. Sender pays is, in fact, the default rule for the international telephone system today. If you call someone in France or Thailand or Argentina, you pay a per minute charge to your phone company, and they pass along a fee to your friend's phone company, and your friend does not have to pay to receive your call. The internet does not work like this, right? If you want to send data to your friend overseas, you and your friend both have to pay for your own internet access, but then the international data transfer is typically unpriced. So this enables products to exist like YouTube, where it's a lot of intensive bandwidth, and I believe that Ambassador Kramer mentioned the example of Udacity. We like to think at Mercatus about Marginal Revolution University. Which is where our friends Tyler Cowan and Alex Tabrock teach a development economics course to the world for free. And that data is available on an unpriced basis globally, worldwide. So the shift from sender pays on the phone system to the system of unpriced internet transfers, like any important shift, creates some winners and losers. And arguably the losers are the telecom companies and the governments who rely on those international phone calls for revenue. So these parties can no longer tax foreigners. They can no longer export their tax collections. So it's not too surprising that some companies and governments that lose revenue from the internet model want to return to a sender pays model for the internet. As Ambassador Kramer said, this proposal was originally raised by ETNO, the European Telecom Industry Association, in the preparatory process. They've backed off of that proposal, but the proposal may be picked up by some African states or some Middle Eastern states. So we haven't seen entirely the death of sender pays and related proposals. One of the arguments used to support the idea of sender pays for the internet is that it would provide much needed financing for building out telecom infrastructure, especially in poor countries. By charging higher rates, companies or governments would be able to afford to expand the network. So this is actually an empirical claim, and I decided to look at the data. So we can't say for sure what sender pays for the internet would look like, but we have a pretty good idea of what sender pays looks like in the context of international telephones. So I got some data from the FCC about the rates that US callers have paid over the past 20 years or so when they have called foreign countries, and the amounts specifically that were passed on to the foreign telecom companies. And I also got some data from the World Bank on the adoption of various kinds of telecom services in every country. So I figured if there's anything to the claim that higher rates lead to greater investment in telecom infrastructure, then there should be a positive correlation between US payouts to foreign countries and adoption of telecom services in those countries. So let's take a look at the data, if we can. Here we have growth in telephone lines over the last, over an 18-year period, telephone lines per 100 people. So the vertical axis here is the change in number of fixed line telephones per 100 people in that period. So higher up means that they've had more fixed line telephones, lower down means that they've had fewer. And then the horizontal axis is how much on average did it cost to call this country in this period, or at least what is the foreign portion of that cost. And so you see not much of a relationship there. The line is pretty flat. So if high rates lead to greater build out of fixed line telephone systems, then you would expect countries to cluster in the top right corner of this graph. So because they're charging a lot, right, and then they're investing a lot. You may notice, do see some countries in the lower left-hand corner. So those would be countries that are not charging very much, and maybe they're not investing very much in their fixed line systems. So do these seem to be the countries that can't afford to invest in fixed line telephone systems? No, in fact, they're actually wealthy countries that are moving beyond the fixed line systems to maybe mobile-only communication systems. So to get a complete picture, maybe we need to look at mobile telephone adoption as well. So I've done that in the next slide. The vertical axis here is the growth or the increase in the number of mobile cellular subscriptions per 100 people. And the horizontal axis is the same as in the last graph. So again, we don't see a positive relationship like we would expect to see if the story about sender pays leading to growth of infrastructure were true. And here we see exactly the opposite. We see a negative relationship. What about the internet? So on this slide, we have the growth in internet users per 100 people. So for many countries, there were no internet users in 1992. But since then, we've seen a lot of growth. Once again, like with mobile phones, we've seen internet usage growth in countries that charge low rates to US callers. And how about broadband? Again, a negative relationship. Lower rates in the telephone system seem to be correlated with higher rates of growth in the broadband sector. So what are the takeaways from this? The ability to capture revenue from foreign sources does not seem to lead to more investment in telecom infrastructure. there doesn't seem to be a real substitute for creating an environment in which private companies are willing to invest. So the bottom line for Wicket is that Sender Pays seems to be offering a false hope to some member states for the kind of solution to their telecom growth problems. So this is an important issue that I will be watching out for in December in Dubai. Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Paul Brigner. I'm Regional Bureau Director for the Internet Society. And I first want to tell you just what the Internet Society is, because I do see a lot of familiar faces in the room, but I see many that I don't know, and I think it is important that you know about the Internet Society if you don't. So we are a global nonprofit organization dedicated to ensuring the open development, evolution, and use of the Internet for the benefit of all people throughout the world. Since 1992, we have served as a global clearinghouse for technically sound, unbiased information about the Internet, as an educator, and as a focal point for a broad-based community of interest in Internet-related initiatives around the world. Significantly, we provide the organizational home for key Internet standards development bodies, the Internet Engineering Task Force, the Internet Architecture Board, and the Internet Research Task Force. We also happen to be the home of the newly launched Internet Hall of Fame. So if you're getting the idea that we are all about the Internet and making the Internet better, then I've convinced you. So I hope so. We also have a very active public policy group. And we are a sector member of the ITU Telecommunication Standards and Telecommunications Development sectors. And in that capacity, we have participated in the Wicket national and regional dialogues over the past several years. And we have actually recently made a contribution in the public consultation that the ITU opened up. And I think that was actually a very good development that the ITU did offer an opportunity for the public to have their recommendations heard or their views heard. So I just wanted to highlight a few things that are in our document that we submitted in our comments. So first and foremost, I think that we recognize that the Internet has been built and has succeeded based on its multi-stakeholder framework and multi-stakeholder development model. So that is something that clearly needs to be safeguarded throughout any discussion of the Internet. But what the ITRs are certainly not about the Internet. They're about telecommunications, and they're actually developed in a time that we were focused on the PSTN, the Public Switch Telecommunication Network. And that's the type of network that we should be focusing on in a document like the ITRs. The Internet itself, Internet, ICT, information and communication technologies, those types of terms should not even be considered when we're talking about telecommunications networks. So that's one key point. I'd also note that it is critical to maintain voluntary standards for the ITUT, the telecommunication standards that come out of the ITU. We are firm believers in open, transparent processes in developing standards. That's how the IETF works. That's what's made the Internet successful. That will continue to help our telecommunications systems develop and evolve as well. There was a question raised earlier by Richard Bennett here in the front about the development of Internet exchange points. And that's another just a topic I'd like to touch on briefly. The Internet Society issued a study, I think back in September, talking about how valuable Internet exchange points are in the Internet ecosystem, and that when they are deployed in developing areas, developing countries, they actually help local content develop there. They improve users' ability to access the Internet. They give them better performance. There's just a whole variety of benefits that come from those internet exchange points being developed. And over just the past few years, the number of internet exchange points has increased from 4 global internet exchange points to, I think, somewhere over 350. So there's a dramatic increase in those internet exchange points, and we need more. But ironically, the proposal from the European network operators for sending party pays actually disincentivizes the development of those internet exchange points. And you've already heard about some of the other the dangers of that type of sending party pays model, but that's just another reason why we don't want to go down that path. It is just a model that was designed for the PSTN and not for the internet, and is rife with all sorts of issues when you talk about internet traffic. So that's the comments I'll start with, and thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'm Gary Fowley from the ITU, actually in the ITU Constitution. So we have to pay attention to that. And I think at that point it's probably hard for anybody to disagree with those principles, although I expect there are people that do, and I will hear from them. So the question facing WICIT, I think, is how best to adapt those ITRs to facilitate those goals. At present, there seems to be, I think I'm supposed to have a slide.
The right. You press the right button.
Press the right button. That's just what we're supposed to be. We kind of looked at the range of proposals that have come in and grouped them that way. And I'm not going to begin to talk about any of those, or all of those, but I want a couple of them I think are interesting and worth noting. There are proposals for the ITRs that relate to sustainable development and climate change, which is an important issue. With broadband, we can better address climate change by encouraging the ICT networks and industry to adopt measures that lessen the use of energy and natural resources by ICT networks. ITU standards have been adopted in that sense. We do have a standard for a universal charger that at hopefully some point really soon will make the market. Finally, revised ITRs would help to bring further recognition that the human right to access communication is as fundamental as the right to freedom of expression. So now I'm going to go back to what I don't think WICIT is about. And this is a bit of a selection from the latest propaganda du jour. It comes from a video that's been released that says how the ITU could put the internet behind closed doors. And I'm going to quote it. It warns, quote, that a government-controlled international body is making the play to become the new place where the internet's future gets decided. It's called the ITU. And in December, the world's governments will meet to decide whether to expand its mandate to make important decisions about the net. Okay. First of all, WICIT cannot expand the ITU's mandate. That's defined by our ITU's constitution. WICIT will revise the ITRs. It's a treaty. It has to be revised or looked at. And as already noted, I think it was the ITRs in 1988 that changed the international telecommunications regulatory regime to allow the expansion of the internet in many ways and make it even more of a multi-stakeholder reality. Not to mention the WSIS process that ITU brought to the international community. I think it could be argued and will be argued that the internet as we know it today would not exist if the ITU member states, including the private sector, had not agreed to the current ITRs in 1988. Now, one more point on this. Further, when you access the internet, you are already using ITU standards, such as ADSL or Wi-Fi radio frequencies, which we make available through our radio regulations. Yes, as you know or should know, ITU manages the International Treaty on Spectrum. So I expect that all of you at some point today are going to use video compression technologies that were standardized by ITU, voluntary standards, and that's a very important point. But voluntary means if they work, they're adopted broadly, so all the more reason for them to make sure that they're consensus-driven and that they are consensus and market-driven and that they work. As well, much of the internet's fiber optic, wireless, terrestrial, and satellite backbone use ITU standards which have been developed based on consensus reached by the ITU membership, which includes both public and private sectors. And at this point, yeah, we actually in the ITU Constitution. So we have to pay attention to that. And I think at that point it's probably hard for anybody to disagree with those principles, although I expect there are people that do, and I will hear from them. So the question facing Wicked, I think, is how best to adapt those ITRs to facilitate those goals. At present, there seems to be, I think I'm supposed to have a slide.
The right, you press the right button.
Press the right button. That's just what we're supposed to be. We kind of looked at the range of proposals that have come in and grouped them that way. And I'm not going to begin to talk about any of those, or all of those, but I want a couple of them I think are interesting and worth noting. There are proposals for the ITRs that relate to sustainable development and climate change, which is an important issue. With broadband, we can better address climate change by encouraging the ICT networks and industry to adopt measures that lessen the use of energy and natural resources by ICT networks. ITU standards have been adopted in that sense. We do have a standard for a universal charger that at hopefully some point really soon will make the market. Finally, revised ITRs would help to bring further recognition that the human right to access communication is as fundamental as the right to freedom of expression. So now I'm going to go back to what I don't think Wicked is about. And this is a bit of a selection from the latest propaganda du jour. It comes from a video that's been released that says how the ITU could put the internet behind closed doors. And I'm going to quote it. It warns, quote, that a government-controlled international body is making the play to become the new place where the internet's future gets decided. It's called the ITU. And in December, the world's governments will meet to decide whether to expand its mandate to make important decisions about the net. Okay. First of all, Wicked cannot expand the ITU's mandate. That's defined by our ITU's Constitution. Wicked will revise the ITRs. It's a treaty. It has to be revised or looked at. And as already noted, I think it was the ITRs in 1988 that changed the international telecommunications regulatory regime to allow the expansion of the internet in many ways and make it even more of a multi-stakeholder reality, not to mention the WSIS process that ITU brought to the international community. I think it could be argued and will be argued that the internet as we know it today would not exist if the ITU member states, including the private sector, had not agreed to the current ITRs in 1988. Now, one more point on this. Further, when you access the internet, you are already using ITU standards, such as ADSL or Wi-Fi radio frequencies, which we make available through our radio regulations. Yes, as you know or should know, ITU manages the International Treaty on Spectrum. So I expect that all of you at some point today are going to use video compression technologies that were standardized by ITU, voluntary standards, and that's a very important point. But voluntary means if they work, they're adopted broadly, so all the more reason for them to make sure that they're consensus-driven and that they are consensus and market-driven and that they work. As well, much of the internet's fiber optic, wireless, terrestrial, and satellite backbone use ITU standards which have been developed based on consensus reached by the ITU membership, which includes both public and private sectors. And at this point, yeah, we